Okay, thank you, members. It's 2 p.m, so we'll start on agenda item number 1, which is the minutes to approve as a correct record the minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 20th of October. Do I have someone to propose that? Councillor Taylor, and seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favour? It's
carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Urgent business. We have no urgent business brought forward at the discretion of the chairman. There shouldn't be any need to divide the agenda during the course of the meeting. Declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No? Okay, so we move on to the first item of the agenda, which is, the next item of the agenda, which is agenda item number 5. And I believe that is being introduced by Mr. Murray. Yeah, so Mr. Murray.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, members. So the agenda item today is our audit findings report. This summarises the findings from our audit of the Council's financial statements for the year ended 31st of March 2022. It's a fairly lengthy report. There's a number of things in here that we're required to report to you. What I was going to propose to do is just pull out some of the key elements and then invite any comments or questions from members at the end. If I start on agenda pack page 7, so it's page 3 of our report entitled Headlines, this really sets out the headlines of where we are with the audit. So we, as previously discussed, have delivered the audit this year for the first time in a few years with a mixture of hybrid working, which we've all got used to, but also being out here in Follerton House with officers at various points during the audit face-to-face, which has proved really, really helpful actually in progressing issues and has led to a few efficiencies, I'd say, and also closing down matters quicker than perhaps in previous years. We haven't identified any significant adjustments to the draft financial statements that the committee saw previously, so no significant changes. There is one caveat to this in that there is a national accounting issue at the moment affecting all local government bodies with significant infrastructure assets. So yourselves have a number of coastal defences, coastal assets, etc., which are classified as infrastructure. A query was raised by an audit firm a few months ago to CIPFA and the NAO around accounting treatment for some of these assets and indeed record availability, given some of these date back 30, 40, 50, 60 years and the records just simply aren't there. The summary is government and CIPFA have concluded that this is an accounting issue, and what they are doing currently is consulting on a draft statutory instrument, so introducing some legislation that will, when enacted, take away some of the challenges in the short term around the accounting. So it will make short-term changes to the code, which is what Lisa, Pauline and colleagues produce the accounts to. That will make short-term changes to that, which will take away the audit problem of getting evidence for those numbers. Now, unfortunately, that statutory instrument is not yet enacted. I don't know if enacted is the correct terminology, but hopefully you understand what I mean. The latest information that we have is that the instrument would come into force from the 25th of December, so Christmas Day. You'll excuse us, I'm not sure that Pauline and colleagues or me and my team will be in the office on Christmas Day to run through what that actually means. So in reality, this looks like this will be an issue that is resolved early in 2023. Whilst we've seen draft wording, what we don't quite yet know is what the final version will look like and subsequently what Lisa and colleagues may need to do to the set of accounts that's in front of you and what we may need to do from an audit perspective. We're all hoping, given there's a recognition that this is an issue, that the instrument will be worded such that the issue that is identified is not an issue for 21-22 and for the future years that it covers. So there should not be significant additional work required once that comes into force in the new year. What that clearly means right now is I'm not in a position to issue an audit opinion until that instrument is enacted. Lisa, colleagues, and myself have had a chance to review the final wording of that and make any necessary changes. You'll be aware, and I recognise it here on this page, that the timetable for accounts and audit for 21-22 was a target to get audited accounts by the end of November. Clearly, that's not going to be the case this year because I can't issue that opinion. So the council will need to publish a notice on its website, basically stating until the statutory instrument is issued and any changes as required can be made, the audit cannot yet be completed. This isn't just a South Hams issue. This is impacting a significant number of local government bodies, especially upper tier bodies who have significant highways, networks, etc. But lots of district councils have coastal defences, flood defences, etc. And it doesn't take too many of those assets, given their scale and value, to be an issue from an audit and accounts perspective this year. Other than that, work is largely complete. Clearly, there's certain things that can't be concluded until this instrument comes into place, and the findings are reported later in the report, and I'll touch on the key ones. But I wanted to bring that out because that's a new thing for this year. It's not new just for South Hams, it's new for the sector, but it's important that I discuss and describe that to you. Over the page on page 8, so our other responsibility is in respect of value for money. So the National Audit Office Code states that the auditor's annual report, which sets out our work on value for money, must be presented within 3 months of the audit opinion date, the accounts opinion date. Clearly, as I've just described, I'm not in a position to issue that. Our intention is to issue that auditor's annual report again early in the new year, once the accounts audit can be concluded as well. Important to stay at this stage, the work we have completed on value for money thus far, no significant weaknesses, which is the terminology in the code, no significant weaknesses identified in terms of the council's arrangements. And finally, on this page, I've not exercised any other additional statutory powers or duties that I have. When I do issue the audit opinion, I will update the committee at that point, and Lisa and Pauline. If you remember last year, I was unable to issue the audit certificate due to ongoing whole of government accounts work. So the audit guidance hadn't been released and the data collection tool hadn't been released by HM Treasury. We're in a similar position at the moment for 21-22. I'm not envisaging that that's going to be released imminently. I've not seen any correspondence to suggest that would be the case. So it may well be again that when I issue my audit opinion, I have to withhold my certificate until such time as I'm able to do the whole of government accounts work. In reality, the public inspection period has passed, so no local electors are able to object to the statement of accounts that are in front of you. It is a formality to close down the audit. The one thing that could change is if there were any post-balance sheet events, so events that happen between now and the date I'm able to issue that certificate. I may need to reflect those within said certificate, but that's the only implication there in terms of holding that certificate. Again, every local government audit for 21-22 will not have its certificate until that guidance is issued. Skipping on a couple of pages then, so page 11 of the agenda pack 7 of our report. This sets off reporting again our work against the significant risks that were previously reported to the committee through our audit plan. The first one, management override of controls. That's an assumed risk at any entity and every audit, so we're not able to rebut that.
Sorry, Mr. Murray, I've just got a question from Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'm going back a little bit before you travel too far on. First of all, could you clarify coastal assets? And I find it a bit negative that we aren't getting a position from you on what we need to hear. I know you said that because of government legislation and everything else, but it's kind of a bit negative, and I don't feel that that is the way forward. But first of all, coastal assets, can you clarify what that is and how do we value that?
Sure. So through you, Chair, coastal assets would be things like sea walls, sea defences, potentially groins to stop coastal erosion, etc. So they're those type of assets that the council would incur expenditure on to maintain the coastline effectively. They're generally recorded at their cost. So what the council would contract somebody to construct and maintain those assets. That's how the assets would be recorded. One of the key issues nationally is that it's been recognised that if you've, say, got a sea wall that may be in place for a significant number of years, additional expenditure will be incurred on that sea wall to maintain it, fix it, storm damage, etc. What's been recognised is that generally local authorities have not been de-recognising old expenditure when they recognise that new expenditure. So effectively in the accounts, it's cumulative. So you may have spent, say, £1 million in 1990, another 1 million in 1995, another 1 million in 2000. So it keeps going cumulatively, and what should happen is the old expenditure should be written out when replaced by new expenditure. So it is a technical accounting issue. There's nothing more. It doesn't impact on the usable reserves of the authority. But given the values and the numbers, this is a significant material issue from an audit opinion on the financial statements. So without the statutory override and not having access to records for a significant number of years prior, simply because they're not available at this authority or other authorities, I need to wait for that instrument before I can issue an opinion. The only other option would be to say, I don't have assurance over this number, and then issue a qualified opinion, which clearly the council doesn't want. I don't want to be in that position, and nationally we don't want to be doing that. So that's the reason why I can't progress any further than where we are today at the moment until government enacts the legislation which will take away that accounting problem. Does that clarify the question?
Mrs. Buckle, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So in terms of our infrastructure assets, they are things like the Salcombe Fish Quay, Dartmouth Ferry slipways, all of the pontoons that we've got, and Kingsbridge Quay walls. So those are the largest assets which sit within our infrastructure assets on our balance sheet. And as Mr. Murray has said, they are material for us because they have a net book value of over £6.5 million. So it's their material assets on the balance sheet. So this will be a national issue for all councils up and down the country which have a material value of infrastructure assets on their balance sheet. And we do, because we are a coastal authority, and we do own infrastructure assets like the slipways, the quay walls, all the pontoons. So hopefully that helps to explain.
Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, could you remind me when accounts used to have to be signed off by? Was it the 31st of September or was it the end of August? Sorry, the 30th of September. There isn't a 31st.
Yes, that's right. So there have been different deadlines during different years. So in some years we've had to produce our draft accounts by the end of May. And at that point they had to be audited, I think, by the end of July, wasn't it? So that's the quickest it's ever had to be done. In previous years it has been the end of September. For this particular year, audited accounts should be signed off, or the target date is the end of November. But this will be a national issue for any authority that's got infrastructure assets on their balance sheet, as we have. And unfortunately, there isn't anything we can do about it because the government haven't come out and issued the final guidance about how these assets should be treated. And until they do, it does mean that unfortunately our external auditors can't sign off our accounts. But everyone with material infrastructure assets will be in the same position.
Can I just come back, Chairman, because I do remember previously, certainly when it was the end of September, that if you were so much as an hour late after midnight, you got all sorts of burning oil poured on you by the authorities, didn't you, above. But now it seems to be that the delay is getting longer and longer and longer. So this year, we are not going to get our value for money assurance until February. If it goes so much as a month and a day further than February, we should be tripping over ourselves and involving a third financial year in the previous year before last's accounts. And what it's not fair on, it's not fair on officers, because officers have a job to do to prepare our budget for the following year. And yet they're still really involved in having to sort out accounts and things, because this accounting year is getting longer and longer and longer. And it doesn't seem to be our fault at all. It seems to be loads of stuff that we really, really don't need to put forward. And being tripped up by a statutory instrument. Now, you could say there's been a certain amount of chaos in government and that's why it isn't there. But a statutory instrument is something that's written by civil servants. It's not a political thing, it's a technical thing. And so I just really can't see why there is this delay. It doesn't go before Parliament or anything. It just gets signed off, doesn't it, in the background? And that's half the problem, because sometimes you don't even know they have been signed off. But I just find this really, really frustrating. And I do feel for the officers, because this is tripping them up and making their work harder to do. It's already hard because we've got no money from the government anyway, but this makes it harder to do because they're concentrating on like 3 financial years at a time at the moment. Thank you.
Mr. Middlemas?
Yeah, thank you. So I sit on a number of audit committees, district audit committees, and just, I suppose, point out that that South Ham seems further in advance in terms of the external accounts than those. And I suppose it'd be interesting to sort of highlight why that is, whether it's that grant funds is sort of highlighted or focused on the work, or whether it's the work of the internal team to be a bit more proactive in providing the evidence. But as I said, yeah, I can see it's frustrating to be able to not be able to formally clear them, but I think the bulk of a lot of the work has been done.
Mrs. Buckle, anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think that's why when we move to agenda item 6 on the agenda, one of the recommendations is to give delegated authority to yourself as Chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee to sign off those accounts following those notional changes required from the publication of that infrastructure statutory instrument. So we are still able to approve the accounts today, the audited accounts, subject to just that one issue, waiting for the government guidance, and we are requesting the audit committee to give delegated authority to yourself as chairman to do that, so that we can get those accounts signed, and Mr. Murray can issue his audit opinion as soon as we are able. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, I feel we're being penalised through no fault of our own, and it's it's not really fair that we can't get these accounts signed off, put to bed and finished with, and get on with what's coming at us. We're already a long way into the next financial year, but we're 2/3 of the way through, and we've still got last year's accounts hanging over our heads through no fault of our own. I don't know who made these rules up, but I think we could do something to maybe let them know that we're not best pleased about it. Thank you.
Mr. Murray, would you like to continue?
Yeah, thanks. I'll maybe try and address some of the comments as well through the presentation as we go. So if we move to page 11 of the agenda pack, as I was mentioning, so management override of controls is a presumed risk at all entities. We've undertaken sample testing of journal entries posted to the ledger in year, didn't identify any indication of that risk. We didn't also find any significant changes in estimation techniques, which may be another indication of the presumed risk. If you remember back to 2021, we did note that it took us and officers considerable time to get a transaction report from the council's financial ledger system into a position where we could interrogate that as auditors. It took a lot of intervention from management to get there, and one of the recommendations we made last year was to discuss that with the system supplier and other local authorities to automate that. That tends to be what we see in other organisations. Pleased to say management did that. In our view, the recommendation is closed. Day one of the audit, we had that report waiting for us rather than waiting a few days or weeks into the audit. So clear progress there and efficiency in that point of view, and also I believe an efficiency from the council's point of view. Now that report is set up, that can be used again annually. So pleasing to note, we have raised a control weakness recommendation this year within respect to journal entries and journal postings. There's a couple of elements to this, and it's the recommendation itself is in Appendix A with the management response. So first of all, as has been the case in previous years, management wouldn't get a second person to review a journal entry before it's posted to the ledger in all cases. There is a financial limit, £25,000, which is imposed. We do see that in other organisations. Clearly, from an external audit point of view, that means there is a theoretical risk there of either fraud or error through journals. As I've noted, our testing hasn't identified any, but there is a theoretical risk there. The other element to this is the access rights of certain individuals to the system. So there were fairly high in comparison to other authorities, fairly high administration or super user access rights given to members of the finance team. Now, what that means is they can go in and have lots of different privileges behind the scenes to do things to the system. Normally, that would be more tightly controlled, and only a small handful of individuals have that to reduce any risk there. So, the two recommendations form the recommendation that's in Appendix A, and management's response is included to that. The other risks then are set out on pages 12 to 14. 2 points to note on page 13, so the valuation of land and buildings. This is an area we've discussed a few times previously. Our work is largely complete. This year, as always, we've been expected to go even further into valuations, and that includes getting corroborative evidence for floor areas that are used as part of the calculations. What we identified was there was a record of those floor areas that was held generally on a spreadsheet. So an internal surveyor may have measured the properties a number of years ago and transferred those to a spreadsheet. There wasn't a record of who took those measurements, when they were taken. For other assets, there's detailed drawings, like CAD drawings, etc., that we were able to review. So we are seeking alternative assurance, things like evidence from the Valuation Office Agency to confirm floor areas used in those calculations. But we've raised the second of our two recommendations this year is around the documentation and the records within that area. And then finally, page 14 on the risks. This sets out our work on the net pension fund liability. We still await the final responses from the Devon Pension Fund auditor. We have informal responses from them, which we've used in our work, but clearly we need to await their final response before we're able to conclude. I spoke to the pension fund auditor this morning, and they are waiting on 2 pieces of evidence from the pension fund, which have been promised today, and then they'll be in a position to issue that final report to us. The next few pages set out the work we've undertaken on key estimates, judgments, etc. Then page 19 discusses briefly the infrastructure asset point that we've already had some discussion on. Next few pages set out our other requirements and responsibilities. One of the things that will come in front of the committee on the next agenda item is the letter of representation. That is, we're requesting standard representations within that, so there's no additional representations for yourselves as an authority. And pages 23 and 24, we've also already discussed value for money. So Appendix A, pages 27, 28 of the pack, they're the 2 recommendations that I've already alluded to. Page 29 of the pack is the prior year recommendation, which, as I said, we've noted as being complete. Page 30 of the agenda pack, these are some of the minor disclosure classification changes that were made to the draft financial statements. What I would say, giving some context, this is a very small list compared to some of the other authorities that I work with, audit. These pages may go into pages. Here you've got 4 fairly minor disclosure points. So going back to the point about the hard work of the officers and Mr. Middlemess's point around why we're in a position where, okay, we can't sign an opinion due to infrastructure assets, but the bulk of the rest of the work is done. I think that's down to good quality draft accounts first time and good quality support from finance officers in respect to those questions that are raised as part of the audit. Final point I want to just draw out, so page 31 of the agenda pack, we report an unadjusted misstatement. This has been reported in the council's findings report for the last few years. It's another technical accounting point. We as auditors have a view of how this particular investment should be accounted for and treated. Management have a slightly different view on that treatment. The cumulative and the in-year impact are not significant. Therefore, management continue to use their accounting treatment. We set out what we think our accounting treatment should be. It's a classification point. We're not saying that those numbers aren't in the accounts. It's just the areas that they appear in. Given the values, they're not material and in line with prior years. The council's proposing to not adjust, and that won't have an impact on the audit opinion that I issue as a result. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the report. I appreciate we've had a few questions already on various points, but I think I'll pause there and invite any further comments or questions.
Do members have any other questions for Mr. Murray? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a comment. And I think probably Mr. Murray is quite right that it is because of what our team has done in advance, which has pushed the audit through. Should I say this quickly? I don't think I can say this quickly, but you know what I mean. And so I'd like to thank Lisa and Pauline and their team very much for really doing such sterling work and having so few things on that list. In fact, Mr. Murray, I don't think it's 4 things, it's 3 things, isn't it? I can only see 3 things here. I can see 3 ticks anyway on page 30. Well done, everybody.
Thank you. Any other comments from any members? At which point, I think, if there's no other comments, and Mr. Murray, there's nothing else for you to summarise, we will close that agenda item, which is agenda item number 5. There's no recommendations, so it's just for noting, members. So I don't propose to take a vote because there are no recommendations on the plan. So we'll move on to agenda item number 6. Thank you, Mr. Murray. Agenda item number 6 is the annual statement of accounts, and Councillor Aston is to present them.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Murray, for your report, which was, as the leader said, excellent report for our officers who worked so hard on it. Anyway, moving on to item 6. This report presents a summary of net revenue and capital expenditure for members' consideration and seeks approval of the audited statement of accounts for 2021-2022. The report recommends to give delegated authority to the chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee to sign off the accounts following any notional changes required from the publication of the infrastructure assets statutory instrument as detailed in paragraphs 4.1 to 4.5 of the report. Following approval of the accounts, the chairman of the Audit Committee is required to sign and date the accounts. Members are also required to consider the content of the letter of representation. Following approval of its wording, the chairman and the Audit Committee and the Section 151 officer, that is the Director of Strategic Finance, are required to sign the letter of representation. I am pleased to say that apart from a few minor disclosure and misclassification changes, the 2021/22 audit hasn't identified any adjustments to the draft Southam's accounts, which were considered by the Audit and Governance Committee in September. Therefore, the audited accounts for 2021-22 presented to members of the Audit and Governance Committee today are essentially the same set of accounts which the Audit and Governance Committee considered at their meeting in September. Finally, the annual governance statement, that is at Appendix C, confirms that the Council has carried out a self-assessment of the extent of which it complies with the 7 core principles of good governance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Baston. So members, there are 4 recommendations before the committee. Do members have any questions for Councillor Baston before we move on to the recommendations? No questions. In which case, I would intend to take all 4 recommendations on block, and they are to recommend that members approve the wording of the letter of representation, the audit statement of accounts, the annual government statement, and to give delegated authority to the chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee to sign the accounts. Do I have someone proposing that? Councillor Rowe, seconded Councillor Taylor. All those in favour?
That's 4 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. So we move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 7, update on progress for the 22-23 internal audit plan, which is due to be presented by Councillor Pearce, the Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the standard internal audit update for the committee. It's a very good result that for 3 of the audits recently completed, there's been an internal audit rating of substantial assurance, the 3 being the business grant scheme, treasury management and contract management of the leisure contract. It's particularly impressive that one of those audits was the COVID-19 business grants, which the District Council had to administer on behalf of the government, where the council paid out 16,600 business grants for a total of 86 million in value. The council had to administer these at pace with the appropriate due diligence and fraud checks in place and with very limited resources. So to receive the highest rating on the internal audit of this process is to be highly commended. And I thank all of the many officers involved in that process. And I do recall at the height of it that we often had queries and questions, and we were getting contacted by businesses outside the council that were really desperate to get hold of the money because of the circumstances. And particularly Steve Damon was absolutely brilliant with members, and he got back to us so quickly and gave us replies, and that whole team works so well. It's just unbelievable. So to go on, the recent internal audits on climate change, payroll and the Dartmouth Lower Ferry all received the internal audit rating of reasonable assurance. Fraud is a growing issue, and an increased focus by the internal auditors is therefore welcomed. The internal auditors plan to undertake a fraud risk assessment in most of the district councils they support in the next few months, including South Hams and West Devon. Internal audit also report that work is in progress by officers to review previous internal audit recommendations and assess whether they are completed or are still open. Finally, there's good progress to deliver the audit plan. The chart on page 3 demonstrates this. Appendix 2 provides more detail on where each audit is. In relation to audit resource, the second internal auditor has substantively completed his government grant work on the business grants and is now largely working on undertaking internal audits, which will help complete the audit plan. So it's good to have 2 of them back in there working away, asking the awkward questions as they do when they go out around the office, and we'll look forward to seeing the further reports. I just need to say at this stage to Mr. Murray, I argued about the 4 things. I was actually looking at the West Devon audit report, therefore wonder where all these coastal things were. So apologies for that. I'm on the right agenda now.
Thank you, Mr. Middlemas. Would you like to add anything to Councillor Pearce's comments? Can you turn your microphone off, Councillor Pearce?
Sorry.
Yeah, so Paul Middlemas from Devon Audit Partnership. I'm your internal audit manager. So obviously focusing on Appendix A. So overall, normally we're I suppose looking at a reasonable assurance, although perhaps the balance of recent audit opinions might move it towards more of a substantial. So, but we'll continue to highlight what we're thinking in this area. So just a basic summary on some of those audits. So yeah, so the post-payment insurance on business grants, obviously we looked at the controls in place to to ensure that fraud and error was reduced to a minimum level, and as it says, the actual sort of payments made in error were sort of 0.1% and a really low figure, and then further reduced by follow-on work to recover the money and so on. So most of the recommendations we made were, I suppose, to inform future grant making in terms of if you were given this grant again, how would you do it, rather than retrospective. Again, yes, so substantial for treasury management. Again, always useful to confirm that yes, the investments and so on were are being made on a low risk basis and so on. And payroll again, so reasonable. So this was looking at the Team Spirit software, which, as members will be aware, it's now being replaced by iTrent, and we're currently looking at how officers are using iTrent. I understand from talking to the auditor today, it all looks pretty good, but there will be a report sort of stating, whether it continues to have good functionality and produces the report it needs and that they need and so on. And then just some of the other audits. So yes, it's substantial for contract management. So this is a positive message regarding the actions by the officers to manage the leisure centre contracts and to assess contractor viability and so on. And we know that attendance levels appear to be recovering back to where they were pre-pandemic. And then the Dartmouth Ferry, I suppose, quite a technical report about the system used to pay for and account for the money and so on. Since the audit, the auditor has continued to work with the business area to look at the system and meet with a software provider and so on, and identify, well, how can improvements be made to the system, or indeed whether the system needs to be changed. So that's work that is ongoing. And then yes, a reasonable for climate change. So we note the progress in some areas, but also noted there's opportunities to make improvements. For instance, adaptation plan. So this is about thinking about the impacts of climate change and what you need to change in council operations, and a specific risk and opportunities register as you would have for any big project, and also perhaps a better understanding of the funding required to meet your net zero targets. The paper also includes some mention of counter fraud. So fraud apparently constitutes about 40% of all fraud in the UK. So we're looking to put a bit more attention on that, and as part of that, to undertake a review of fraud arrangements in the council and we'll report to this committee on that. And then I've previously mentioned about the proposal to undertake a review of single person discounts within the district. So that's now we've now asked Devon County Council Procurement to procure an agency to do that work. I think the contract is to cover a year with an option to extend. So I suppose there'll be latitude for councils to decide when to support that activity if they want to do it, being aware of work demands and so on. And then so in terms of current delivery plan, I think if you look at the table, actually shows that most of the work is either reporting or in field work, and with 2 auditors back, and also support from within DAP in terms of doing the information, the cybersecurity audit and risk management audit and so on, that we can sort of pretty much fully deliver the plan. So that's a sort of summary. Happy to take any questions from anyone.
Do members have any questions for Mr. Middlemass?
Yeah.
Councillor Spencer.
Just picking up on your comments about the ferry, you say on page 215 or report 6, page 6, the issues of counting money and reconciliation of cash and banking. I'm assuming that the monies taken on the ferry are largely cash, or are they not? Are they card transactions as well, or what? I've never used it, so I don't know. But okay, you made some recommendations at the foot of that section of the report, which it looks as if you've made before. But what I'm really getting at is that with the issue of fraud that you've already identified and without being personal to anyone involved, has anyone checked with our fidelity guarantee cover, assuming that we have it, that this is or is not an issue? Because you say that most fidelity guarantee companies will want the dual presence. Do ours?
Mr. Milmas?
I don't know. The recommendations are summaries of some very complicated recommendations, and I know sort of the auditors been looking at the processes. I think it's how the systems talk to each other as well, and putting in measures such as it says, involvement of two officers in the counting reconciliation to really reduce down the risks of fraud, but also error. So prevent that fraud risk from occurring. So I don't know if Lisa can help with that.
Yes, certainly.
Mrs.
Thank
Buckle?
you. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we do have fidelity guarantee insurance, and that does talk about cash amounts. From memory, it doesn't specify where that cash is. It's just for the whole of the council's activities. So I believe it would cover those specific circumstances. Yes, because it covers the any cash carried or within the activities provided by the council, and the ferry is clearly one of our services. But yes, we can confirm that.
Councillor Spencer?
Sorry. So does our insurance specify the requirement for two people?
I don't believe it does. No,
Doesn't?
no.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought so from policies I have seen in the past. I don't know if Mrs. Henstock would like to give a bit of an update around the work on the ferry, if that's all right.
Mrs.
Thank
Henstock?
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding the audit report, I did talk to our head of maritime, who is in charge of the ferry, responsible for the ferry, and talked about the current software. And he assured me that he is looking at the current processes with the auditor and also with the software supplier. And recently they had a 2-day meeting to try and progress the functionality. So they are absolutely taking that seriously and are trying to improve that process. In terms of reconciling at the minute, there is a reconciliation process of the ferry debtors, which our business support team do, and they do match the daily income received to the returns posted from the ferry. And as we said, a lot of that is not cash anymore, it is more card payments because that was introduced down at the ferry. In terms of two officers counting and reconciling the cash and banking, the head of maritime is very aware of this risk and is doing everything possible to minimise it. But unfortunately, one of the two officers is part-time. So without increasing resource levels, I'm not sure that is ever, unfortunately, going to be the case. But that is being looked at the minute in terms of working with Matt, our auditor, as well. So just a bit of an update there for you members.
Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
And one last thing on the same subject. It talks about the lack of functionality as far as obtaining reports are concerned, which seems a bit strange in what would, I guess, be a proprietary system. Any comments?
I think it's more about systems talking to each other, and that's my understanding from what Mr. Middlemass just said as well. I think it's the reports are there, but it's not talking to the relevant system to get it out. So I think it will happen, but it's just to do with the functionality at the minute isn't working correctly.
Any other questions from councillors? Councillor Baston.
Just wanted to make a comment really that we need to start moving away from cash handling, be it at the ferry or through our parking meters, etc. I think it's a dangerous area. We seen, for instance, in Totnes during the year, was it 8 parking machines that were broken into just for the cash? I think we need, most companies are moving away. We talk about the lower ferry, the higher ferry, you can't pay by cash on the higher ferry, you've got to use a card, and if you want a concessionary card, you've got to do it, pay online. You can't even do it on the ferry. So I think it's something we need to start moving away from.
Councillor Rudd.
Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Buston has said exactly, because I think that we need to make our parking meters updated so that they do become card only, because I think more and more of us all the time now use our cards. You might carry a bit of cash, but very rarely do most of us use cash now. And I think we need to get up to date. It would save a lot of hassle, really, of not quite sure what's going on and all the rest of it. So I think we need to think about this maybe in the life of the next council. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Yes, has anybody done a cost benefit analysis of this? Because I understand that changing all the parking machines is quite an expensive exercise. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I assume that it would be phone or card payment on parking machines and on the ferries and that kind of thing. So the mobile aspect of it. And I know that at some beaches there is virtually no signal at all to operate either for the cards or for phones. So that would be Bigbury is one of them, isn't it, Bernard? And North Sands is another one. Although the signal at North Sands does seem to have got better since the chief executive of BT insisted on having that mobile 4G station put in up at wherever it is, up at East Saw, without planning permission. So it has got better. That has got better, but there are those things to be overcome. But I do think the council seriously needs to look into it, because I agree with Councillor Bastone that it must be a cost to us to send people out to collect the money or collect it from the ferry. There is then the fraud risk, balanced against changing the machines and the percentage you lose on the card that you have to pay the card administrators. So, but I think we need to see those figures and actually take a leap into the modern age.
Mr. Middlemass.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate all that's been said about move away from cash and the massive advantages from doing it, reducing risks of fraud. Also, I suppose I'd feed in, and I did work for 4 years or so with HMRC, and they were always very keen to think about those, for instance, who were not able to, did not have cards, did not have bank accounts. So obviously that will be a consideration for yourselves in terms of thinking, well, what about those individuals who are not able to access a banking system and so on easily? So that I just thought I'd feed that in as a consideration.
Do any other councillors have any questions on that particular agenda item? So that's agenda item number 7, and recommendations. There are 3. Hold on a second, I'm just finding the page with the recommendations on. The progress made against the 22-23 internal audit plan and any key issues arising are noted and approved. Do I have someone to move the recommendation? Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, thank you, Chair.
It's unanimous. Thank you. So we have one final agenda item, which is agenda item number 8, which is the Audit Committee Work Plan, the last page on all of our documents that we've been provided. On my system, I've got it down as page 223. As members can see, there is a relative, what I was speaking about before the meeting is there's a relatively short agenda on the 5th of January, but then there is quite a significant agenda on the 9th of March, which it ties in with the end of the financial year. So March's meeting is likely to be quite extensive. So I suppose as a committee we are asked to note and approve the work plan, which is the next 2 meetings coming up in January and March. Do I have someone to move that as a work plan? Councillor Taylor, and seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favour?
That's unanimous for the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. That's the last item on the agenda. So having finished agenda item number 8, I will now close the meeting at 10 to 3.